3 children sued their own father for his house, but his final will changed everything. People often say, there is no pain greater than being betrayed by the very children you raised. But what if I told you a 72-year-old father was taken to court by his own 3 children, all because they wanted the aging house he still lived in? Inside that courtroom, not a single person seemed to stand on his side. One by one, his children claimed that he was selfish, stubborn, and no longer fit to control the family's assets. But then, the judge opened a final sealed envelope that the father's attorney had been holding for years, and the entire courtroom fell silent. The children who thought victory was within reach suddenly realized they had thrown away the most precious thing they had ever possessed. This was more than a lawsuit. It was the price of greed. Stay until the end, because the final truth will force you to ask yourself, is money really worth sacrificing a family? As the sun began to rise above the maple trees in front of the porch, Harold Mason woke up just as he did every morning, 72 years old. His hair was almost completely gray. His hands were covered in calluses from more than 40 years of carpentry. He lived alone in an old wooden house at the end of Maple Creek Street in Ohio. The house was not large. Its roof tiles were worn. The fence in the front yard had to be reinforced with pieces of wood Harold had cut himself. But to Harold, that house was his entire life. He had built every wall with his own hands after marrying his late wife, Margaret. Every brick, every window, every rosebush by the porch. Each one carried a memory of a family that had once been deeply happy. After Margaret died of cancer 8 years earlier, the house became strangely quiet. All 3 children had moved away. His oldest son, Daniel, was a sales director at a real estate company. His second child, Linda, ran a dental clinic. His youngest son, Kevin, owned a chain of used car dealerships. They were all successful. They all had beautiful homes. They all drove expensive cars. The neighbors often told Harold how fortunate he was to have raised such accomplished children. Harold would only smile. He never told them that, over the years, family dinners had become less and less frequent. The phone calls had grown shorter. Then they disappeared altogether. On his 72nd birthday, the only cake he received was a small one brought over by a neighbor. All 3 children sent him the exact same message. "Happy birthday, Dad." No one called. No one came to visit. Harold did not blame them. He always told himself, they have lives of their own. That morning, as usual, he made a cup of black coffee and sat in the wooden chair on the front porch. A black SUV slowly stopped outside the gate. Harold smiled. It had been almost a year since Daniel had last visited. But the smile vanished when Harold saw that Daniel was not alone. Linda stepped out of the passenger side. Kevin emerged from the back. For the first time in years, all 3 children had come together. Harold stood up, a rare light of happiness in his eyes. He hurried toward the gate. "I thought today must be some special occasion." No one answered. Daniel opened his briefcase. He pulled out a stack of papers. Then he placed them on the wooden table on the porch. Harold looked at his 3 children. He suddenly noticed that none of them had brought a gift. No one hugged him. No one asked, "How are you, Dad?" Daniel took a deep breath. "Dad, we need you to sign these papers." Harold looked down. On the very first page, he saw the bold words, "Transfer of ownership of residential property." He looked up. The space between the father and his 3 children suddenly felt unbearably cold, and Harold understood. They had not come home because of family. They had come because of the house. Harold stared at the stack of papers on the table. He did not touch them. He did not say a word. The only sound was the wind moving through the maple trees in the front yard. Daniel was the first to break the silence. "All you have to do is sign, Dad. It will make everything much easier." Harold narrowed his eyes slightly. "Easier for whom?" No one answered immediately. Linda stepped forward, trying to keep her voice gentle. "Dad, this house is old. It isn't safe for you to live here alone. We talked about it, and we think we should sell the house and buy you a small apartment with an elevator and someone to look after you." It sounded reasonable, except Harold had already seen the look in all 3 of their eyes. There was no concern, only impatience. He asked calmly, "And the money from the sale?" Kevin answered quickly. "Well, we'll manage it for you. We can invest it and make it grow." Harold nodded faintly. "So I lose the house." "Yes, and I don't keep the money either." Kevin gave an awkward smile. "What would you need to keep it for? We're your children." Harold looked at each of them. He remembered a winter more than 30 years earlier. Daniel had developed a dangerously high fever. Harold had carried him nearly 2 miles through the snow after their car broke down on the road. Linda had once dreamed of becoming a doctor. Harold and Margaret had worked night shifts for years to pay her tuition. And Kevin, the most mischievous of the three. Kevin's first car had been possible only because Harold sold the collection of woodworking tools he loved most. The memories returned as clearly as if they had happened yesterday, but the people standing in front of him now seemed to have forgotten all of it. Harold gently pushed the documents back toward Daniel. "I'm not signing." The atmosphere changed immediately. Daniel was no longer calm. "Stop being stubborn, Dad." "Stubborn? Do you have any idea how much this land is worth now?" Harold shook his head. "I never cared." Daniel lowered his voice. "More than $2 million. The figure did not surprise Harold. He only let out a quiet sigh. "So this is why you finally came back. The land," Linda stepped in. "That isn't fair? Not fair?" Harold looked at his daughter. "For 11 months, none of you visited me. On my birthday, no one called. Last Christmas, I ate dinner alone. But the moment you found out the house had increased in value, all 3 of you appeared together. No one spoke. Kevin lost patience. If you refuse to sign, this is going to become very complicated." Harold looked directly into his youngest son's eyes. "Are you threatening me?" Kevin turned away. Daniel took a deep breath and removed another stack of papers from his briefcase. "You should read this." Harold picked it up. This time, it was not a transfer agreement. It was a copy of a legal petition. Daniel spoke slowly. "If you refuse to cooperate, we'll ask the court to rule that you are no longer capable of managing your own assets." Harold froze. He read the words again and again. They intended to prove that he was elderly, mentally incapable, and unable to make legal decisions, so they could take control of everything he owned. The man who had spent his entire life raising 3 children into adulthood now had to prove to those same children that he was still sane enough to live in the house he had built with his own hands. Harold placed the petition on the table. He did not become angry. He did not shout. He asked only one question. "How long have you been planning this?" The 3 siblings looked at one another. No one answered. That silence was the answer. Harold slowly stood. He opened the wooden door, its paint faded by time. Before stepping inside, he spoke in a voice that was almost unnaturally calm. "If you believe the court will give you what you want, then I'll see you in court." The door closed. Outside on the porch, the 3 siblings stood frozen. They did not know that years earlier, Harold had anticipated a day exactly like this, and he had prepared a secret none of them knew existed. 2 months later, Monday morning, a cold gray sky hung over Columbus. Outside the Franklin County Courthouse, groups of people hurried through the entrance. Among them were Daniel, Linda, and Kevin. All 3 wore expensive suits. Walking behind them were 2 prominent attorneys from Hamilton and Pierce, one of the largest law firms in Ohio. Daniel checked his watch. "We'll finish this before noon." Linda nodded. "If everything goes according to plan," Kevin gave a thin smile. "He won't be able to fight us." None of them appeared worried. They believed their evidence was overwhelming. A psychological evaluation, medical records, a statement from Harold's family physician. They even had a declaration showing that Harold had repeatedly refused to sell the house even after its value had increased tenfold. To them, that was proof of a man who was no longer thinking clearly. At exactly 9 o'clock, the doors to courtroom 4 opened. Everyone took their seats. In the row reserved for the plaintiffs, the 3 children sat close together. None of them looked toward the door. Not until Harold walked in. He wore the same old dark blue suit, the black tie Margaret had given him on their 30th wedding anniversary. His leather shoes had been carefully polished. He walked slowly, but his back was straight. His eyes were calm. He did not look like a frightened man. Only one person walked beside him, Attorney Thomas Bennett. 68 years old, retired for nearly 3 years. Daniel gave a quiet laugh. All he could afford was one retired lawyer. Kevin lowered his voice. "We've already won," Harold heard them, but he did not react. He simply sat down. He placed a small, worn notebook on the table in front of him. Then he looked silently at the state seal behind the judge's bench. At exactly 9:15, Judge Rebecca Collins entered. Court is now in session. After the formalities, the attorney representing the 3 siblings stood. He spoke for nearly 40 minutes in a persuasive voice. "My clients have no intention of seizing their father's property. They want only to protect him. Medical records show that Mr. Harold Mason is displaying signs of age-related memory decline. He lives alone. He refuses every offer of assistance. He refuses to sell an asset, even though doing so would clearly benefit him. One by one, the attorney presented the files, photographs, reports, medical examinations. Every document had been prepared carefully. Several people in the courtroom began to nod. It appeared that every piece of evidence was working against Harold. Then Daniel was called to testify. He stood in the witness box, his voice filled with emotion. "I love my father, but he isn't the man he used to be. There are days when he forgets to eat. He forgets his medication. He even forgets to lock the door," Linda followed. "I'm a doctor. I understand the signs of cognitive decline. We only want our father to be safe." Kevin was last. He lowered his head. "If protecting my father means people will call me an ungrateful son, then I'm willing to accept that." A few people in the courtroom quietly wiped away tears. The siblings' story sounded convincing. Even several reporters began writing that the case might end sooner than expected. The judge turned toward the defense. "Mr. Bennett, do you have a response?" The elderly attorney slowly rose. He carried no towering stack of documents, only an old leather briefcase. He walked to the center of the courtroom. He remained silent for several seconds. Then he spoke. "Your Honor, I do not intend to argue about Mr. Mason's memory today. I only ask the court to examine one item." He opened the briefcase. He removed a brown envelope. It had yellowed with age. A notary's seal was stamped across the outside. Beside it was a handwritten instruction. "Open only if all 3 of my children take me to court over the house." The courtroom went completely silent. Daniel frowned. Linda's face turned pale. Kevin stared at the envelope as if he could not believe what he was seeing. Attorney Bennett placed it on the judge's desk. Then he said calmly, "This envelope was notarized 6 years ago. My client instructed me to open it only under the exact circumstances before us today." Judge Collins lifted the envelope. She examined the seal. Then she looked at Harold. "Mason, do you confirm that these were your instructions?" Harold nodded faintly. "Yes, Your Honor." The judge used a letter opener to cut carefully along the edge. Not a sound could be heard in the courtroom. Every pair of eyes focused on the paper being slowly removed from the old envelope, and the first few lines of that letter changed the expressions on all 3 children's faces completely. Judge Rebecca Collins carefully unfolded the paper, yellowed by time. The courtroom was utterly still. She read the first line aloud. "If this letter is being opened, then what I feared has come true. My 3 children have taken their own father to court because of this house." Not a sound. Daniel clenched both hands. Linda lowered her head. Kevin swallowed hard. Harold remained seated in silence. He did not look at his children. His eyes were fixed on the small photograph of Margaret tucked inside the old notebook on the table. The judge continued reading. "You will wonder how I knew this might happen. 6 years ago, I accidentally overheard your conversation during your mother's birthday gathering. You thought I was asleep, but I heard every word." Daniel shot to his feet. "That's impossible," Attorney Bennett answered calmly. "I ask that the plaintiff's client remain orderly." The judge nodded and continued. "Daniel said that once this land was rezoned, it would be worth millions of dollars. Linda asked when I would finally agree to sell. Kevin laughed and said, 'If he won't sell, we'll find another way.' That was the first time in my life I no longer felt like a father. I felt only like the owner of a piece of land." A woman sitting in the back row raised a hand to her mouth. The air in the courtroom became heavy. But the letter was not finished. The judge turned to the second page. "From that day forward, I began to prepare, not to punish you, but to discover whether love still existed in this family." Attorney Bennett rose. "Your Honor, I request permission to submit the notarized documents prepared on the same date as this letter." He presented a thick file. It carried the notary's certification and a date exactly 6 years earlier. No one could claim the evidence had been manufactured after the lawsuit began. The judge examined each page. Every legal requirement had been satisfied. Daniel began to lose control. "It's only a letter!" Attorney Bennett smiled. "Yes, but it is not everything." From the old leather briefcase, he removed a second envelope. It was smaller and separately sealed. "This is a document, mister. Mason instructed me to give the court only if his 3 children chose to pursue the lawsuit to the end." The judge opened the envelope. Inside was a copy of a property trust agreement. The date of execution was also 6 years earlier. She read several lines and then looked up at Harold. Mr. Mason, you transferred ownership of this house into a trust 6 years ago? Harold nodded. Yes. The courtroom erupted in whispers. The attorney for the 3 children immediately stood. Your Honor, what does that mean? The judge answered in a measured voice. It means the house is no longer owned personally by Mr. Harold Mason. Legally, the plaintiff's demand to transfer ownership may no longer have the subject matter they believed it did. Kevin's face drained of color. No, that can't be true. Harold spoke for the first time since the proceedings began. His voice was quiet, but clear. I hoped I would go through my entire life without ever having to use those documents. I only hoped that one day you would come home to share a meal with me, not to take the house. Linda began to cry, but Harold no longer looked at his daughter. He turned toward the window, where the first rays of midday sunlight entered the courtroom. Judge Collins closed the file. She understood that this was no longer merely a dispute over property. What was about to be revealed next would determine the fate of all 3 children and expose the final secret Harold had kept for 6 years. The judge's gavel struck. All parties will maintain order. The courtroom slowly became silent again. Attorney Thomas Bennett rose for the final time. He placed a dark blue file on the judge's desk. Your Honor, this is the last document my client instructed me to disclose if the case reached this point. Judge Rebecca Collins opened the file. Across the first page were the words, "The last will and testament of Harold Mason." The will had been executed before a notary 6 years earlier. It contained the signatures of every required witness. It carried the notary's certification. Every legal formality had been satisfied. The judge began to read. If you are hearing these words, then you chose to sue your own father. I do not blame you for wanting better lives. But I cannot give everything I built over a lifetime to people who treat family like a contract. Daniel closed his eyes tightly. Linda began to sob. Kevin still struggled to appear calm. The judge continued. All proceeds from the house, together with my savings and investments, shall be transferred to the Margaret Mason Scholarship Fund. The fund will award annual scholarships to low-income students studying construction, nursing, and education. The 3 professions your mother always respected most. The courtroom stirred. No one had expected an estate worth millions of dollars to be dedicated to charity. But the letter continued. My 3 children are not being deprived of anything. Because what I wanted to leave you was never money. I gave you a secure childhood, a peaceful home, a good education, a family that knew how to love. If that was not enough, then a few $1,000,000 will never be enough either. Harold lowered his head. He had written those words during a sleepless night after overhearing his children 6 years earlier. He had hoped he would never have to disclose that will. He had hoped his children would change. But today, that final hope had ended. The siblings' attorney stood. Your Honor, my clients would like to negotiate. Harold silently shook his head. It's too late. There was no anger in his voice, no satisfaction, only the exhaustion of a father who had carried too much for too long. Daniel stepped closer. His voice trembled. Dad, will you give us one more chance? Harold studied his eldest son for a long moment. Then he answered slowly. The first chance I gave you the day you entered this world. The second chance was every time I forgave you for making a mistake. The third chance was the last 6 years when I waited in silence for you to come home. You chose to waste every one of them. No one could answer. Judge Rebecca Collins dismissed every claim brought by the plaintiffs. She also confirmed that the notarized documents and the will were legally valid. The hearing was over. Harold slowly stood. He did not turn to look at his children. He did not wait for an apology. He walked out of the courtroom with the same measured pace he had always carried. But for the first time in many years, the burden in his heart had been set down. Behind him, the 3 siblings remained frozen. They did not lose the house that day, because 6 years earlier, they had already lost something far more valuable: the right to be trusted completely by their father. People often ask, did Harold regret making that will? The answer is no. Because some decisions are not made out of anger. They are made with clarity. Harold did not leave his property to strangers, nor did he spend every dollar simply to punish his children. He chose to give what he had to people who understood its value. It was the final thing he could do to honor the wife who had built an entire life beside him. 1 year after the trial, the Margaret Mason Scholarship Fund awarded its first scholarships. Some recipients were the children of construction workers. Some were young women studying nursing after caring for mothers with serious illnesses. Some were young men raised in foster care who still dreamed of becoming teachers. None of them had ever met Harold, but each of them carried a piece of the hope he and Margaret had left behind. As for his 3 children, Daniel sold his real estate company after losing many clients when the lawsuit became public. Linda spent months volunteering without pay at a senior care center. Kevin left the city. People said he often visited the church near the cemetery where his mother was buried. No one knew whether they had truly changed. But everyone understood. Some fractures in a family can never be repaired to what they once were. Harold lived for several more years. He moved into a small, quiet house in the suburbs. Every morning, he still drank a cup of coffee on the porch. The difference was, there was no longer any waiting in his face. He had learned to accept that a parent's love may be unconditional, but trust is not. If today's story leaves you with one thing to consider, perhaps it is this: money can buy a house, but it cannot buy a home. A will can divide property, but it cannot create family bonds. And the greatest wealth a person can possess is not found in a bank account. It is found in the way they treat the people who sacrificed their lives for them. If your parents are still with you, call them. If you still have the chance to say thank you, do not wait until it is too late, because some things, once lost, cannot be bought back, not even with an entire fortune. Thank you for spending your time with Veritale. If this story touched your heart or gave you something to think about, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you never miss another unforgettable story. Never judge the people who truly love you by the size of their wallet. One day, you may discover that the richest heart was worth far more than the richest man. Until next time, every story leaves a lesson. Every lesson shapes a life. This is Veritale. We'll see you in the next story.